Hi, and welcome to the Room for Reinvention podcast. I'm your host, Kim Conan. Today's guest is Stephanie Wilson. She's a historian, brand strategist, web designer, political messaging consultant, and unofficial health coach. Yes, she does all of those things. She has started two businesses and two nonprofits, and she lives in Lexington, Mass. She has a 15-year-old son and a white puffy dog named Ruby. This is an amazing interview. This woman is so inspiring. You're going to love Stephanie's story. The evolution and her reinventions that she has done throughout her life are amazing. So here we go. Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for being
Hi,
on the show today.
hi, Kim. Thanks for having me. It's really exciting. This is the first time I'm a podcast guest, and
Oh,
and
this is
reinvention is kind of, I don't know, constant for me. So it's
yes,
really great to
yeah.
be here.
Nice. Well, thank you. And it's really been great listening to other women's reinvention stories because um it's very inspiring, and also even though they're different, they're a lot alike, the same sort of theme. So I would love it if you could share your reinvention story with our guests so we can learn more about you.
I'd be happy to. So my reinvention story is a series of reinventions. Um, After college, I started in high tech public relations. I was in an agency. I was in two different agencies, kind of leading teams by the time I was 23. And that got old really, really fast because it was in the dot-com boom in San
Mhm.
Francisco. And it was pretty high pressured for someone in their early 20s, pretty high pressured for anyone, really. And so I got burnt out. I spent a lot of time. I had kind of the quarter life crisis. What am I going to do with myself? This isn't it. How can I really find something that uh, I'm doing where I'm not helping people that I completely disagree with their worldview?
Mm.
So I decided to go to graduate school, and not only decided to go to graduate school, I decided to go across the country. So Um, first, I went and volunteered at a kibbutz in Israel,
Wow.
knowing that when I came back, I was going to go to grad school. And part of the reason for that is 'cause I was going to be studying Middle Eastern studies, and I had spent my junior year in Jerusalem. And so I thought that would be a kind of a good way to get into the mood and get some better language under my belt.
Mhm.
So, I left the program a little bit early and went to work in Jerusalem, where I got the chance to work with NGOs doing peacemaking and peace building things, which really, that's another journey entirely. But that really changed the way I looked at my place in the world and what I wanted to be doing.
Mhm.
So I came back. Um, And I freelanced for a while until it was time to go to grad school, and then I freelanced during grad school, so that really helped pay for the beginning. And I started and I thought, "Oh my god, this is awesome. I can wear jeans, I can sleep in, and the only person I'm responsible to is myself. And
Mm.
I don't have to worry about clients, and I don't have to worry about bosses, and this is phenomenal." And so, I, in fact, decided that 2 years wasn't going to be enough. So I applied for a PhD to get into the PhD program, and I started that. And so I was on the road to getting a PhD in Middle Eastern studies with a focus on Jerusalem. I spent a lot of went to Israel a whole bunch of times. Um, my language skills were really good. And in the middle, I met my husband, like right when I was starting to think about, well, where am I? Am I going to stay in Boston if I'm not tied to Brandeis? And then I met my husband. He's like, are you going to move? And I was like, not if there's
Not
nothing,
anymore.
not anymore. I was going to like go live with my dad or something. And, uh, and so I carried on, and I got the PhD, and the focus was on, I wrote a history of a museum. So it was looking at how does a museum um, reflect the people who built it. right?
Mm.
So it's about what did they say, how did they say it, and what does it say about them? And that will come into play later, closer to now, because what I do is all around storytelling and all the different ways to tell stories. So, so I got my PhD, and it sounds much easier than it actually was, but it took 7 years. In the middle, I got married. Um, I didn't have a kid while I was doing it. My husband absolutely refused to start until he's like, when your defense is scheduled, that we can start trying, but not before. Like, okay. So so my mentor actually offered me a job in my field, um, and I got pregnant, like in this general time frame, and then uh, sh- there was a new center for Israel studies that was being started, and I essentially became a pawn in that creation. So she wasn't going to be my boss anymore, even though I had chosen her above a different uh, job. And so I went to work for this new center, but my boss was my thesis advisor, which I do not recommend to anyone.
Mm.
And so I worked at the center for a year and a half, and I wanted to do more. And in a lot of places, if you have a PhD, you get to a certain level in research centers. I knew I didn't really want to be a professor, but and then you get promoted. I mean, you get to be an associate director, you make more money, you have more autonomy. And I went to my boss and I was like, okay, I'm doing I'm doing all these things. Um, I'd like you to consider a promotion, which, I had always been taught that you never are going to get what you don't ask for. And I had worked for women, which had its ups and downs. I had never worked for an older, very much older man before, who told me that I was very ambitious, as though that were something that was not good for a woman to be, and that I could work as hard as I wanted, as much over um, work hours as I wanted, but I was just never going to get a promotion.
Wow.
And uh, and that he thought that I don't even know, because every other center at my university, if you had a PhD and were doing the work, you got a promotion.
And he didn't explain why.
He said, well, you're not producing new research and you're not teaching,
Mm.
although most of the rest of the university, that was not something that was required for that level. So I left and I went, and this is the first, okay, so it's the second reinvention, right? I was in PR in San Francisco, grad school, and I had put 7 years into getting my PhD. And I went to the business school at Brandeis, where I was associate director of 4 different research centers.
Wow.
And um, but I was no longer working in the field that I had dedicated so long to. So that was, I was still in the same general surround. I knew how to get things done. But at this point, I had had migraines since I was 9.
Mm.
And throughout high school, they were every day. And then after that, they were, episodic, which means less than 15 times a month. And around 2010, they got chronic, which meant they were starting to come every day. So I decided to take a health leave of absence, which turned into a full leave. I left that job and I was on disability. And for a long time, all I could do was manage my health situation.
Mhm.
I wasn't I wasn't working for anybody else. And I was really just trying to stay afloat. I had a little kid at that point. Um, my son was 3, and I just kind of was bare knuckling it. And so along the way, I had the best therapist that I could ever have had, and changing from I had put everything into this idea that my identity had gotten really wrapped up in the fact that I had a PhD,
Mhm.
that I had worked really hard for it, that I was going to be uh, doing peace building, that I was going to uh, be working in higher ed. Um, and not having that, in fact, not having any other professional thing to fall back on was something that I really had to work on. If my identity wasn't going to be in my work, what does it mean to be me?
Right.
And what was the core of me that I could use as the core to my identity? So, so during that time, I realized that I had a lot of creativity inside that I wasn't letting out. So I started making jewelry and painting and writing poetry. And eventually, I started playing around with making websites, all in an attempt to use my creativity, but not worry about the the focus more on the journey than
Mm.
than the than the destination. And it's very hard for me to focus on the journey and not the destination. But in
Yeah,
those
for
years,
a
I
lot of
really
people.
need, right? I really needed to just focus on what it was that the pieces of me were made up of.
I love it.
So
Creative
yeah,
therapy.
right? And so that took quite a while. And at the same time, I was learning how to deal with my narcissistic mother and to separate from that and manage my expectations around uh I have my husband has I've been married now for 19 years. My husband's been fantastic the whole time, um with several surgeries and and chronic migraine and everything. But I had to figure out how I was going to be a woman standing on my own, making my own boundaries, particularly with my mother and my mother-in-law. And that was kind of a job in and of itself, but it was
Yeah.
a lot of internal work,
Mhm.
on how I was going to be the adult, strong woman that I always thought I was, and now I needed to learn how to live it.
Yeah.
So, fast forward a little bit, my husband's cousin had a business. She had issues with ADHD, and she was like really struggling to run the business, keep track of time and invoices and
Mhm.
money, and so I helped her like get systems in place, and that was my first gig of what am I going to do? So, because I'm for all sorts of reasons kind of an overachiever, but also an overperformer. So I could create I can create systems.
Yep.
And so I did that for a while, and then I was like, okay, well, I can launch her into the world. Now what am I going to do for me? And so this is about the time that Pepper Lane started. I don't know if you were a Pepper Lane
Yeah.
member. It was
Mhm.
like beginning, before it was like even they had a website. And so I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do here? And I worked on learning how to build websites, and I
Wow.
started small. I started charging almost nothing or bartering, um, and built up a web design business over the course of 6, 7 years. Where so I never wanted and so much work that I couldn't handle it,
Yep.
but I wanted enough to bring in some money to, um, you know, to help the household. So that was another reinvention, right? From the account executive to the the doctoral student, and
Mhm.
then PhD, to somebody exploring art, to somebody who actually made a business out of it. Um, And then the next piece, so going along just fine, getting more clients, becoming more and more professional. And my clients were super happy with me because they could like give me basically gibberish kind of give me the idea of where they were going. And I had the ability to sort of take that and turn it into the story they wanted to tell, but didn't know they wanted to tell.
Wow.
So, uh, so my business kept going because basically word of mouth. So, but then 2016 happened, and the election happened, and um, I became more and more focused on American politics, and I got involved in the um, the 2020 election. And what happened was I was a volunteer for one of the uh, Democratic um, contenders. And when he dropped out, I joined the Biden campaign. And there was a group who had created a parallel structure to the campaign on digital. It was called the Biden Digital Coalition. And what we did was we created social media content and then had different groups focused on different kind of social media so that we could amplify the messages,
Mm.
Biden's messages, and the message of uh, the values that we thought that he represented. So I was the national Facebook lead for that. And that was my entree into the next transformation. Um, I did that. He won. Um, it disbanded. And I realized I wanted to do that, but I wanted to do it my own way. So I started a nonprofit called More Perfect Democracy, where I was working to amplify the messages of pro democracy forces on social media. And I gathered groups together and we'd talk every week, talk about what messaging would work. I'd give presentations on messaging. Um, and then, as part of that, one of the people on my team, my Facebook team, approached me asking me to do websites for various organizations, political organizations in Indiana. So I created a website for a women's action movement. And then she came to me with the candidate for Secretary of State. Can I do her website? So I did her website because this woman was the campaign manager, and some content. And then they kind of went their separate ways. And this woman, whose name is Mary, asked me to co-found with her a nonprofit to help build political power in Indiana. And I'm in
Mm.
Massachusetts. Um, but it seemed to me that Massachusetts was doing okay, but Indiana is not.
Yeah.
So I co founded another nonprofit with her called Who's Your Victory Alliance. And generally, the same time, she went to work for a candidate for state office and asked me to be the communications director. So I
Wow.
spent the fall being the communications director for a candidate for state representative in right outside of South Bend, uh, never having been to Indiana. Um, and we didn't win, but now I am working with Mary to figure out how do we build power in Indiana. And I launched a podcast with the candidate, Heidi Beidinger, um, last week. We put a trailer out and we're recording the first episode next week. So
That's
that is
wonderful.
meant to build her profile, to build my profile. Um, in addition to which, my husband, I, and a third partner who worked at Brandeis just launched a business in leadership development, doing coaching and courses, leadership development for people who work in nonprofits or higher ed or small businesses to um, learn how to lead an organization where everyone feels seen and heard and safe.
Mm.
So, talk about reinvention. I've got my own two for-profit businesses, which, by the way, do not make a profit. We're still the leadership business. We're still waiting for our first client, um, and two nonprofits, one of which sort of melded into the other, where we're trying to put together an entire program to, from the ground up, build political power in Indiana.
Wow.
Um, So that is my reinvention story. I don't know that we can call it a reinvention story. Maybe it's a reinventions story. Maybe it's just an evolution story. But I went, yeah, from account executive to PhD to now entrepreneur, and political messaging strategist.
Wow. I think I think it is reinventions, but I also think that it's inspiring because I think often people feel stuck. They're not as brave maybe at thinking about, well, because some people would say, well, I just got my PhD. This is where I need to stay. They might stay stuck in that organization, hoping that they might get a promotion, even though they were told they most likely won't. So it's pretty interesting how you have done all these sort of different iterations to, yeah, reinvent yourself with different life transitions.
Right. I mean, some of it wasn't by choice. I would not have left my job if my migraines hadn't gotten so bad.
Mhm.
I probably would have stayed there and then found another university to work at. Maybe tried to teach a couple classes and build my resume that way. But my body just called a halt.
Yeah.
And I went through an entire journey of trying to manage my migraines. And that's a separate journey. And I'm actually sort of thinking, um, I do informal coaching of people with migraine now. Pretty much everyone who knows me comes to me when they either get it or things have gotten worse, and they say, okay, where do I go and what do I do and what can I do to feel better and all of that stuff. So
I have chronic
I'm,
migraine too.
do you really?
Yeah, and it is now I I get I have a neurologist. I go and I get Botox every 3 months in my head, and
Yeah, I
then I
did that
take
6 times.
I've done it for years, and I get an Ajovy injection every
Right. I have
month.
not tried that. So that's my next step.
Yeah, and then I take
Does it?
something else. Oh, sumatriptan if I have it, but it's terrible, and it does set your life back because when you're living with a chronic illness every single day, especially migraine, it's like, and the medication that you take for it. Yeah, I suffered for years, and it makes you depressed because you don't feel good.
Right.
So, yeah, it is definitely a life changer.
Yeah. Well, I'm going back to the neurologist. I've been managing with daily triptans for the last 10 years,
Mm.
which they tell you is dangerous. But then if you actually read the research, they're over the counter in Europe. So lots of
Oh,
people
wow.
take them daily. And so they haven't found any connections. So I kind of just left it because it was working and I could manage my days.
Hmm.
And now I'm going to go back and try again.
Yeah, that's
But
good.
I don't know. We'll see. But in the meantime, then I gained 70 pounds when I was in that journey. And so then there was a whole journey around, I did weight loss surgery and like I had to sort of get me back because
Hmm.
they, like all the things that they try, they don't care. The
Yeah.
doctors don't care.
No, they don't.
And they
They
barely
don't.
even tell you when you're going to be on a weight gain drug. And those like change your entire system.
Yeah. No, it does. And yes, exactly. Even when I go to my neurologist now, if I start telling him how I'm feeling, he doesn't care. He's just like, yeah, whatever. He's just there to stick the things in my head. He's not really whatever. But yeah, it is a journey. And yeah, you gain weight, you can get depressed and it affects your life, your personal, your professional life. But I think what is interesting about you is I love the creative part because creativity is something that I talk about a lot. And I
Right.
feel like, and I belong to this new group. It's called, well, the book, The Artist's Way.
Yes.
Okay, so a friend of mine who's a writer is put this pilot group together. So we meet once a month and we do one chapter a month. But it's, you know, getting being creative and tapping into those different parts of yourself is really so therapeutic, like you
Right.
did. And also identifying yourself with your job, which a lot of people do,
Right.
hence the reason why they stay stuck, or I've dedicated so much time, how could I give this up?
Right.
I love that you used a creative outlet to explore different parts of yourself that we just shut off, part of like that book is like when we're younger, creativity is so exciting and it's about our
Right.
journey. But then once you get to a certain age, it's like, okay, that's off. It's now business. You need to get a job, go to college, have a house, kids.
Right.
So that was part of your process, right? The creative
A-
part.
Absolutely. And I always viewed what I was doing in PR sounds super um,
That's actually very creative.
businessy.
Yeah.
It is because what you have to do, and this was always the part that I was best at, that I had intuitively, was that you have to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand how what you say is going to be absorbed.
Hmm.
And that is something that you can't, it's very hard to teach that.
Yeah.
It's an intense empathy, which is probably part of the migraine. I
Mm.
have sensory issues, so I have very strong empathy, absorb a lot around me, which allows me to be able to understand how people might take in what I say, but it also leaves me open to absorbing the energy around me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but and then, with my PhD, I studied a museum, right? Like, how does what they put in it tell that story? So it's all about storytelling, and that's
Yes.
been a real through line throughout the entire process. So I would love to hear more about your group. There are some days where I'm just like jonesing to get my hands on a paintbrush, or
Hmm.
pastels are my latest because it's easier. I don't have to like go into the basement and open up all the paints and then,
Yeah.
protect the area and whatever.
But it is cool how even though you have had these different iterations, it's like you said, that through line. It's like because to make the websites and all of
Yes.
your messaging that you're doing with your podcast and the political and the Facebook group, and it's all being able to
Tell
create
the
something.
story.
Right, exactly. And it's in these different mediums. It's super cool.
I've been having a great time, and I'm actually thinking about starting a podcast now about people who live with chronic illness and have managed to make a creative profession out of it. And there are
Mm,
so many, like you, like chronic migraine, and you're branching out into lots of different
yeah.
creative
No,
ways.
yeah, exactly. I have a friend who has a son that's sick. He had Lyme disease and then,
Mm,
pandas. And so he's living with daily, with chronic illness. And she has learned a lot from this and it's changed her life. So this is another thing that's fascinating is life transitions. Like
mhm.
we think we're going to be on this path, but then something can happen and it like shifts you to
Right.
a different area of your life. And living with, I think that would be great because living with chronic illness is really difficult. And after a while, I think some people think that you're crazy or that it's all in your head. And that's what some of the doctors have told her with her son, that, you're going to have to think about this might be a lot psychological. So there's a lot of understanding, I think, that needs to happen with chronic illness.
Yeah, and even when they tell you it's psychological, it's still physical. There is
Hmm.
still stuff going on. My son has anxiety, and we had a huge journey with him. He's 15 now. We started it when he was 8 maybe,
Hmm.
and it's just uh it's nothing is just psychological,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Psychological. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and my mom used to say, and my mom was her prime she was in assisted living, but my mom was the one that lived nearby, and she was the caregiver. And she always used to say, well, her body's fine. I'm like, the brain is part of the body. Her brain is
Right.
disintegrating, right? That is not separate in any way.
Right.
But that's the brain body connection is a bridge farther than a lot of people, especially in like early boomers
Hmm.
generation. That leap is hard for them.
Yeah. Very. Yeah. Things are changing though, which is good.
They are in a lot of different places. So it's really funny TikTok having like the best algorithm, obviously it's super dangerous. Um, but it's seriously the best algorithm because you like do it for 5 minutes and then they know exactly what you want. So my TikTok feed is full of doctors and nurses talking about chronic illness. It's talking about politics and messaging. Um,
Well, that's
it's
good.
all, Gen X and narcissistic mothers and parenting. I mean, like it it gets you so well. Just
Wow. That's my next thing is TikTok. I've been dabbling with it, but I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can add one more thing.
I have an account for Hoosier Victory Alliance, which we used basically for Heidi's campaign, and she's phenomenal in front of a camera. But I'm considering actually creating my own content now too. So I
Well,
will be right there with you. It's frightening to me to be in front of a camera. I am
yeah.
very much looking at you on the screen, not at myself, because
Well,
I
that's
hate
good.
it.
Well, the more
I
you
hope.
do it, the more it's like photography. I mean, I used to hate to get my picture taken, and I work, of course, obviously with people that don't like it, but the more you do it, um, the less you care. You know what I mean? Like I had a video up the other day where it wasn't the best angle. I didn't look good, but I was like, who cares? And especially on social media, it's a blip. It's like five
Yeah.
seconds somebody looks at it, but
Yes.
we judge ourselves. So, well, I think this has been really inspirational because I think it helps people realize that they can tap into their creativity to learn about themselves, use it as, therapy as well, right? Because it's a creative outlet that we need. It's
Absolutely.
like meditation,
Mhm.
and it also leads us to be curious about other interests that we may have, and then how our skills that we, already have, how we can put that into something else, which you have done. So, um, where can we find you with all of these? Can you? You're doing you have a new
Oh,
podcast that you're going to be launching.
okay,
Yeah.
so let's start from the beginning. Right. You can find my communications business at stephaniegwilson.com. You
Okay.
can find the um, the nonprofit at HoosierVictoryAlliance.org, and we're looking for people who are in blue states who want to adopt Indiana because it's one of those places they were the first to like adopt an abortion ban, and it's just
Yes, I saw
really
that.
scary there. Actually, it's scary to be a woman or
Mm-hmm.
in the LGBTQ community. It's very scary. So you can find me there, and the podcast is called "What the Gerrymander."
Ah.
And right. And so that's everywhere that you can find podcasts. There's a trailer up now, and that will be interviewing elected officials from red states and talking about how they got there, and activists and heads of organizations that have found a way to make change and build power in heavily Republican areas. So we'll get both the individual officials and the grassroots together, where you don't get both at the same time in most
Mm.
places.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. So yeah, that's called What the Gerrymander. And and then the leadership coaching business is becognition.com. No, wrong. It is called becognitionlabs.com.
B like BE.
No, letter
Okay.
B,
Yep.
cognitionlabs.com.
Okay.
And B cognition is a concept where it's the idea that you have cognition that thinks about uh, how you think about skills and tasks, and then there's another kind of cognition that's essentially kind of like emotional intelligence, and how you can think about how you can be filled with more compassion and love and and the human beings involved in whatever it is you do. That's a concept created by Abraham Maslow.
Mm, okay.
So that's where we got
Well,
that.
this is definitely inspiring that and you're proving you can do more than one thing, right?
You can do more than one thing, but you have to do it in pieces. And as I always say to my kid who gets overwhelmed at big ideas is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's how the whole thing has to go, one bite at a time.
Yep, that's what I say, one little tiny step at a time. It does, that's how I feel when I started my business. It feels overwhelming. And you have so many hats to wear, as you know, but it's true. Yeah, just one bite at a time, one bite of the elephant.
Yep,
Well,
that's it.
thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
on this episode, and it's been wonderful talking to you. And thanks for the inspiration.
Well, thank you for having me. And I hope everybody finds the creativity in themselves to just let themselves escape from their inner constraints for a little while,
Yes, yeah, I
and
agree.
be kind to others and be kind to yourself.
Yeah,
That's
have
that's
some
the whole
grace
game.
for everybody. Yes.
That's right. Well, thank you
Okay.
so much for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you very
All right.
much. Okay.